Imagine, all of Europe is at stake. 2 countries, 2 leaders, and 1 woman. Her beauty, her main asset. Her mission to seduce the emperor at any cost. She went down in history as the Pearl of Italy. But what game was she truly playing? And what did victory in this dangerous game cost her? Her life is a story worth hearing. Paris is shrouded in blue-violet twilight. Wet cobblestones glimmer in the light of sparse street lamps, and a light mist creeps along the pavement, as if hiding night wanderers from curious eyes. A female figure emerges from the darkness. A black cloak falls from her shoulders, emphasizing her stooped posture. The rustle of her steps is almost inaudible, yet it attracts the attention of the rare witnesses. "See? That's her," a barely discernible whisper carried by raindrops. "The Countess of Castiglione. They say she was the emperor's mistress." The woman does not raise her face. From under the hood, one can only see a pale gleam in the depths of her eyes and wasted cheekbones, once the epitome of refinement. Now no one recognizes in her the brilliant Virginia who once captivated Napoleon III and stirred up all of Europe's high society. She slowly turns into an alley, away from the street lamps, away from the whispers that echo painfully in her soul. The cold wind pierces through, but she seems not to notice. What matters is not meeting anyone's gaze, not provoking new gossip, for the remnants of her former glory are melting away like raindrops on the pavement. Stopping at a dilapidated door, Virginia turns back for a moment. Shadows of the past envelop her, returning her to those days when everything looked different. And to understand how this Pearl of Italy turned into a forgotten shadow, we must go back many years. Secret Mission, Italy, 1856, Florence. The summer heat did not leave Florence even with the arrival of evening. In Camillo Cavour's spacious study, the air was slightly cooler thanks to the open windows and the shady trees in the garden. 2 glasses of ruby wine stood on the table in front of the minister, and the air was filled with the scent of old paper and light cigar smoke. Cavour, a statesman with a sharp gaze and a calculating mind, sat in his high chair, his hand resting on a thin folder with important documents. Across the table, in an armchair upholstered in dark red velvet, sat his distant cousin, 18-year-old Virginia. She was the embodiment of that very Pearl of Italy that was already being whispered about in salons. Perfectly sculpted features, ivory skin, eyes that changed hue from blue to violet in different light. But behind this otherworldly beauty lay not childish naivete, but a keen mind and an icy will. Today, she wore a light silk dress that emphasized her fragility, but in her eyes there was a firmness worthy of a military leader. "So, you believe I should go to Paris and conquer Napoleon III himself?" Virginia said it carelessly, as if discussing the choice of a new dress, not the fate of a country and her own reputation. "What will be my reward, dear cousin?" Cavour took a sip of wine, carefully studying her face. In his voice there was not so much persuasion as a statement of fact, understood by them both. "Your gain, my dear Virginia," he leaned forward slightly, "is the opportunity to enter history not as someone's beautiful wife, but as a woman who changed the map of Europe. Italy is on the verge of great changes. We need allies, and there is no stronger ally now than France. If you manage to win the emperor over to our side, well, you understand, by any means necessary, we will accelerate the unification of the country by years. Isn't that reason enough for a nature as ambitious as yours?" She slightly shrugged her shoulder as if batting away a bothersome fly. "Certainly, a noble goal." She placed her glass on the table, her thin fingers sliding over the crystal stem. "But I want more than just honor behind the scenes. France, Paris. A world awaits me there, worthy of my beauty. The finest dresses, the splendor of the court, the attention I deserve. Not a bad place to showcase my beauty and my intellect, of course." Cavour smiled, his eyes glinting slyly. He had not been mistaken about her. "And so it shall be, Nikia. Paris will fall at your feet, I have no doubt. But Napoleon III is no boy. He is known for his passion for the fair sex, but he is a politician. You will have to work hard for him to see you not just as a striking woman, but as an ally. Or at least for your conversations with him to yield the information we need." Virginia leaned back in her armchair, not taking her sharp gaze off her cousin. Excitement flickered in her eyes. "Do you really believe I cannot manage? You forget who I am. When I want something, I achieve it. And I want everything: fame, wealth, influence. And for the future of Italy, and for my own glory, I am ready to make the effort." She gripped the glass so tightly that her knuckles turned slightly white. "I will do whatever it takes," she said quietly, but with a voice of steel. "I will have glory. Italy will have an alliance, and Napoleon will have me. Can anyone doubt that I will succeed?" "And what about your husband?" Cavour asked, casually pouring himself more wine. The question was posed in a casual tone, but anticipation could be felt in it. A barely perceptible, slightly disdainful smile touched her lips. "Francesco? He is used to turning a blind eye to my interests." She raised her glass, looking through the ruby liquid as if seeing her future. "For the sake of a good cause, he will accept it. And if not—" Virginia took a sip, her eyes clouded over. "Then those are his problems, not mine." Cavour nodded thoughtfully. Such ruthlessness in such a young woman simultaneously fascinated and frightened him. But it was precisely this quality that made her an ideal instrument for his plan. Time was pressing. Italy was waiting. "So be it," he finally said softly, raising his glass. "So be it," Virginia replied, leaning back and raising her glass in agreement. They exchanged glances, two players confident in their imminent victory. For a moment, silence reigned in the study, broken only by the rustling of curtains in the evening wind. The scents of blooming gardens and the distant sounds of Florence drifted in through the open window. Neither of them could yet imagine what scandals, triumphs, and downfalls this desperate diplomacy of seduction would bring them. The decision was made. Paris awaited its new queen. Arrival in Paris. The journey to Paris took several days, days filled with anticipation and calculation. Virginia did not waste time on sentiment. She rehearsed future encounters in her mind, planned outfits, practiced smiles and phrases. Next to her in the carriage were her husband, Count Francesco, and their young son, Giorgio. But they were more like luggage than companions on this adventure. Her world narrowed to one goal: Paris, influence, the emperor. Paris was bathed in sunlight. The city greeted her with a hum of life and the scent of expensive perfumes. Carriages rolled along wide boulevards. Ladies in lavish dresses hurried about their business. Gentlemen in top hats strolled at a leisurely pace. Virginia of Castiglione slightly lifted the carriage curtain, a faint smile touching her lips. Paris was even more beautiful than in her boldest dreams. It seemed like a vast, glittering stage where she was destined to play the lead role. "Madam, we will arrive soon," the footman's voice interrupted her thoughts. She merely nodded, continuing to gaze at the scenes flashing by outside the window. The carriage slowed, entering a grand square. Behind the facades of the mansions, the life of high society could be sensed. Virginia noticed a group of ladies who were hurrying towards a large townhouse, their skirts rustling. Their laughter and the swish of silk dresses reached her, promising the world she longed to conquer. "That is one of Madame de Brossard's salons," the footman explained, opening the carriage door. "They say the Empress herself is sometimes there." The Empress? Virginia narrowed her eyes as if already making plans. "So I have yet to enter there." She stepped onto the cobblestones, allowing the lace of her dress to touch the stones. Passers-by cast glances at her, some admiring, others wary. She knew how to make an impression. The deep violet color of her gown contrasted with the gentle morning light, and her straight posture and high-held head declared that this woman was not just another provincial dreaming of life at court. "Paris," she whispered. "Now I am here." In the vast square, the scents of expensive perfumes mingled, and the sounds of violins drifted from open windows. Everything around breathed luxury and languid anticipation. Virginia felt herself at the center of this whirlwind, where every movement, every glance could become part of her game. Before her lay the evening ball, her first official introduction to court society. Her dress was already ready, light as a sigh, with a deep décolletage and a train that would make heads turn. She mentally rehearsed this image, practicing the look, the slight bow, the smile that would drive men mad. She took a step, then another. Paris was opening its arms, but Virginia knew it was she who would open her arms to Paris. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more about forgotten destinies and royal intrigues, subscribe. There are many more fascinating stories ahead. First meeting with Napoleon III. The magnificent hall of the Tuileries Palace, illuminated by hundreds of candles and reflected in countless mirrors, buzzed with whispers and hushed conversations. Ladies in splendid gowns, gentlemen in embroidered uniforms, all mingled in a single glittering carousel. At the center of this luxurious vortex appeared Virginia of Castiglione. She chose a dress of flowing claret-colored satin. The long train seemed to glide across the marble floor on its own, emphasizing her every movement. Her hair, styled in an elaborate coiffure, was held by a thin silver comb. Defiance burned in her eyes. She had come to conquer. The courtiers reacted instantly. Men hurried to catch her eye. Women scrutinized her with undisguised envy. Servants shifted nervously, listening to the new rumors. That Italian woman, they say she is meant to captivate the emperor. Virginia felt this wave of curiosity and reveled in it. "Your Majesty," a lady-in-waiting said in a soft voice, bowing deeply, "allow me to present the Countess of Castiglione from Italy." Napoleon III, who had been talking with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and holding a glass of champagne, turned. His gray eyes, intelligent but slightly weary, swept over her face, paused for a second, noting her elegant features, and moved on. He nodded. "Pleased to meet you, Countess," he said quietly, then returned to his conversation, without even inviting her to continue the chat. Virginia froze. A few seconds of silence. Her heart pounded with a completely unexpected feeling. Not fear, not excitement, humiliation. Not only was he not captivated, he hadn't even shown noticeable interest, as if she were just one of hundreds of ladies fluttering around the court. Burning irritation surged within Virginia. How dare he? They said he was easily charmed by women, and am I not beautiful enough? Not exquisite enough? The shame she felt was almost physical, but she immediately composed herself. To admit defeat at the first meeting? Never! Beneath the quiet whispers and slippery smiles of the courtiers, she took a step away from the emperor, feeling hundreds of eyes upon her. "I will be back," she murmured to herself, clutching the handle of her fan with whitened fingers. "This court has not seen my best entrances, and they certainly don't realize how far I am willing to go." The orchestra began to play a waltz, and Virginia moved towards the wall, where, it seemed, she was no longer desired to be given much attention. But a new plan was forming in her mind. If he did not fall at her feet immediately, it meant the game had just begun. She, Virginia of Castiglione, was not accustomed to being refused. Over the next few months, as if in a game of attrition, Virginia appeared time and again at balls and soirees. Each time her appearance caused waves of gossip. From polite smiles to undisguised envy, the courtiers looked at her as if they wanted to uncover one secret. How far was this Italian countess willing to go to conquer the emperor? Over time, Virginia adopted an unspoken tactic. She would arrive later than everyone else, when the public's attention had already waned, and something was needed to revitalize the atmosphere. That's when she would make her spectacular entrance. While initially her dresses had only moderate daring open shoulders or a slightly deeper neckline, soon she ventured into bolder styles. One evening, her silk dress was so daring that it seemed poised to outrage Empress Eugenie herself. Yet Virginia was not merely a simple seductress. She listened carefully to every piece of gossip, absorbed the atmosphere, and, like a skilled actress, chose the right persona. Sometimes she appeared in light, airy outfits, evoking associations with an innocent nymph. Sometimes she wore dark, almost mourning tones, emphasizing the mysterious side of her nature. The courtiers wondered what she would wear next, and questions about her attire overshadowed more serious political discussions. However, her main goal remained unchanged: to capture the attention of Napoleon III. He seemed willing to notice the new sensation, but, contrary to popular assumption, was in no hurry to fall into her carefully laid traps. Sometimes he would nod to her across the room. Sometimes he would mention the beautiful Countess in conversation, and that was it. His reserve only fueled Virginia's excitement. With each subsequent reception, ball, or masquerade, she changed her tactics, shifting from lively, playful remarks to refined silence that radiated mystery. But if the emperor appreciated her ability to transform, he gave no indication. Nevertheless, the rumor of the unseen Italian woman was already sweeping through the Parisian salons. Some offered compliments, others sarcastic hints. It all worked in her favor, for in such an atmosphere it became clear. Virginia of Castiglione could not be ignored, and she had no doubt, sooner or later her siege would yield results. She was ready to wait, ready to take any risk. Now or never! The night when everything was to be decided was cool, but the palace hall blazed with the light of hundreds of candles and golden ornaments. The music was already fading, invited ladies languidly fanned themselves, and gentlemen sought pretexts to leave the weary gathering. Napoleon III was heading towards the exit, tired of another evening without a spark of novelty. His cane and cloak were brought. Empress Eugénie and her ladies-in-waiting were already making their way to the carriages. And then the tall doors swung open, and Virginia of Castiglione swept into the hall. No, not literally swept in. She entered gracefully, but her entire figure breathed boldness and defiance. Instead of a classic ball gown, she wore a decadent Roman woman costume. A translucent veil slipped from her shoulders. The long skirt was lowered on one side, revealing a shapely leg with rings on every toe, and her long hair, cascading down her back and chest, shimmered in the light of the chandeliers, as if symbolizing an ancient goddess descended from a fresco. Napoleon III, already halfway to the doors, stopped. His gaze, weary and distant just a minute ago, suddenly filled with curiosity. He slowly turned to Virginia and said with a slight smile, "Countess, you are late." A complete silence fell in the hall. All eyes turned towards the audacious Italian woman who dared to arrive last and still hoped to captivate the emperor. "No, sire," she replied so that everyone around could hear with perfect intonation and a slight smile. "You are leaving too early." For a moment it seemed that the palace vaults echoed her words. Napoleon raised an eyebrow, and the courtiers turned to each other, as if hoping to catch the reaction on the monarch's face. The emperor's thin lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. Perhaps he sensed the challenge that had been so lacking at court. Empress Eugénie, who had already stood slightly apart, tightened her lips sharply at that moment, but refrained from comment. Virginia took several graceful steps forward, and the silk fabric obligingly parted at her hip, revealing even more smooth skin. Here and there in the crowd of ladies, muffled snickers were heard, a sign of condemnation and secret envy. But there were also those who stared with delight and curiosity. A couple of court ladies even stood on tiptoes, and one particularly eager one stood on a chair by the wall, trying to get a better look at the decadent Roman woman that all of Paris would be talking about tomorrow. "Is she mad?" someone whispered loudly. "Or overly confident?" hissed back a friend, covering her mouth with a fan. Napoleon III surveyed those present, enjoying the moment of public excitement. This Italian woman no longer seemed like a boring doll to him. Her audacity and defiance breathed a freedom that the emperor had long begun to forget amidst the eternal court routine. "Countess," he addressed Virginia softly, but so that the entire hall could hear, "perhaps I should indeed linger for such a memorable moment." With these words, he inclined his head, gesturing for her to approach. Virginia, proudly straightening her back, took another step, literally feeling the courtier's heart stop. Her eyes flashed with satisfaction. The stubborn monarch who had ignored her charms for so long was finally looking at her differently, with genuine interest, mixed with a slight smile. In that moment, she understood that her patience and the long weeks of siege had not been in vain. Courtiers, whether in fear or admiration, stepped back, leaving a corridor for the new favorite, and Napoleon III, no longer in a hurry to leave the ball, made an inviting gesture to a servant, to bring them wine. Leaving behind all the condemning whispers, Virginia leaned towards the emperor and softly said something in Italian that made him smile. He, smirking, replied to her in a low whisper in French. The crowd held its breath. Thus began the triumph of the Countess of Castiglione, breaking through the court's strictest rules and conventions. Love affair and secret letters. Paris, heated by the summer sun, seemed even brighter against the backdrop of the passions that seethed at the Tuileries court. Every meeting between Virginia of Castiglione and Napoleon III now became a legend. Some claimed the emperor was madly in love with her wit, others that he fell victim to her unearthly beauty. But the true reason for their connection remained known to only a few. Hidden beneath the mask of a love affair was a subtle political game. Virginia, dressed sometimes in a delicate pink morning peignoir, sometimes in an evening dress with an incredible décolletage, lived in a whirlwind of luxury and influence. She sat at her dressing table in her Parisian mansion, but on her lap lay not just a fan, but sheets of paper, and in her hand, an elegant pen. She carefully formed letters, sending another message to her cousin Camillo Cavour. In the lines of her elegant handwriting were diplomatic secrets, overheard in the emperor's bedchamber, impressions from meetings with Bismarck or other European dignitaries. Dear cousin, France is ready for negotiations, but Napoleon requires proof of our seriousness. He hopes for a quick meeting with an envoy from Piedmont. Rest assured I am doing everything possible to keep his sympathies on our side. Today at the ball, I spoke with Monsieur von Bismarck. He seemed a most interesting conversationalist. Virginia carefully folded the letters, sealed them with wax, and handed them to a servant who was to deliver the message by secret routes. She looked at her reflection in the mirror with satisfaction. Her status as the emperor's mistress opened doors that other women could only dream of. She could appear at a ball in a dress barely covering her shoulders and still gather compliments. Her every appearance became an event, every outfit a subject of discussion. Her arrogance grew along with her fame. However, amidst the admiration lurked envious glances. Empress Eugenie's ladies-in-waiting gossiped about the overly ambitious Italian woman, and court ladies whispered about her daring antics. Behind her back, the courtiers called her the Too Much Countess. Too many jewels, too daring dresses, too audacious remarks. But Virginia only found amusement in it. She knew they hated her not for her boldness, but for her success. Meanwhile, her husband, Count Francesco of Castiglione, had completely lost patience. His financial situation was undermined by her extravagant spending. He only came to Paris occasionally, but each of his appearances turned into a scandal. He could not bear the humiliation of his wife openly shining as the emperor's mistress. Divorce. Florence was bathed in the warm light of the midday sun, but a gloomy shadow hung over Count Castiglione's mansion. Francesco paced his study, throwing letters and bills onto the floor. Each piece of paper burned like embers. He clenched a bill in his whitened fingers, bearing a sum for which one could buy a small country house. "Devil!" he rasped. "This woman will ruin me!" On the table lay not only bills, but also newspaper clippings with headlines about the overly daring Countess, whose brazen affair with Napoleon III had attracted the attention not only of the court, but of all of Europe. Francesco reread with disgust the lines about how Virginia shone at balls, how her dresses became more revealing, and her status at court more undeniable. But none of the mentions concerned him. He was nothing more than an empty space in her life. "She is no longer in my life," he hissed through his teeth. He grabbed a pen and began to write a letter, this time not to her, but to his lawyers. His patience had snapped. He could no longer finance her luxurious life, could not tolerate his name being dragged through the Parisian salons. He demanded a divorce. At this time, Virginia, unaware of the scale of her husband's rage, was in her Parisian boudoir, trying on another headdress inlaid with pearls. Outside the window, the sounds of the streets could be heard. Paris was living its bustling life, and this only pleased her. "Madame," the footman said softly, "a letter from Italy for you." She took the envelope, carelessly tore it open, and began to read. With each word, her face remained calm, almost expressionless. Even when she reached the line about divorce and cessation of financial support, her gaze did not change. Francesco was merely a shadow from the past, an unnecessary obstacle. His departure was the logical conclusion of their marriage. She had never loved him. She loved only one thing, her place at court. And why should she worry about losing a husband when she still held the key to the heart of Napoleon himself? She placed the letter on the table next to her powder box, then stood up, adjusted her dress, and calmly said, "Prepare the carriage, I am going to the palace." There was no room for regret in her mind. Now I am truly free, she thought, stepping onto the marble stairs of the Tuileries. But shadows were already gathering behind her, gossip, envy, lost money, and the first, barely noticeable boredom in the emperor's gaze. Clouds were approaching slowly but relentlessly. Fall of a star. The sky over Paris was covered with heavy clouds, ready to burst into rain. It seemed that nature itself reflected the tension hanging over Virginia of Castiglione. Her instinct, the same one that once helped her choose the perfect moment to make an entrance, to sense the shifts in court mood, was now sounding an alarm. Something had changed. Emperor Napoleon III, once ardent and attentive, was now withdrawing more and more often. His glances had grown colder, his words more distant, and her notes and invitations more and more often went unanswered. Or the answer was a formal refusal. "What is happening?" she asked herself in panic, looking in the mirror at her still flawless but suddenly seemingly fading face. Am I losing him? Losing everything? She heard whispers behind her back. Gossip multiplied. They spoke of her excessive vanity, of how she tired even her most devoted admirers with her self-absorption. They whispered that her open display of their affair and expensive gifts had crossed all boundaries of propriety and was beginning to harm the emperor's own reputation. Empress Eugénie, whom she had always ignored with arrogance, was now, according to rumors, starting to act, undermining Virginia's position at court. She felt her pedestal, built on beauty and audacity, beginning to crumble. She could not afford to lose now, when the stakes were so high. With each passing day, the shadows around her deepened. The envious ladies-in-waiting of the Empress, whom she had never given any quarter, now barely concealed the malicious glee in their smiles. Ministers looked through her as if she no longer existed. Virginia felt like a bird in a gilded cage, whose walls were slowly but surely beginning to close in. She decided it was time to act. She couldn't wait until she was completely forgotten. She had to regain his attention, remind him of herself, of them. Her note was short, written with a trembling hand but weighted with meaning. "Sire, I beg you to come this evening. We must talk. It is important. Your Virginia." The hours dragged on agonizingly. Every minute was filled with the fear of refusal. But then, finally, there was a knock at the mansion's front door, followed by quiet steps on the stairs. When the valet announced the emperor's arrival, Virginia felt such a surge of relief that she nearly collapsed. He had come. He had still come. Napoleon entered her boudoir slowly, with a weary look. He sat down on the soft sofa, leaning back slightly, as if preparing for an unpleasant conversation. Virginia rushed to him, trying to envelop him with her charm, to bring back the lightness that had once been between them. She spoke of trifles, of pleasant memories of their affair, of how beautiful their first meeting had been. She carefully touched his hand. Her laughter was light, like a spring breeze, but inside everything was clenching with tension. She felt that he was not truly present. His eyes were distant, his answers brief. She tried to recapture his attention, to be that same irresistible Virginia, but he seemed to look through her. It was as if she were talking to a ghost of their own love. About an hour passed this way. The conversation faded. He listened, but did not hear. He smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Virginia had exhausted all her tricks, all her charms. Coldness filled the room, despite the burning fireplace. When the clock struck midnight, the Emperor stood up. "It was pleasant, Countess," he said with a polite but utterly empty smile. He did not lean down to kiss her hand, as he had done before. He simply nodded. "I must go." Virginia froze, words caught in her throat. In his parting glance, she sensed not just weariness, but a kind of faint shadow of relief, as if he were glad to finally leave this place, to leave her. This was the end. She knew it in every fiber of her being. Perhaps he was simply tired of her scandal-prone nature, of her excessive vanity that had become more than his own interest could bear. Perhaps the pressure from the court and Eugénie had proven stronger than her charms. The reasons could be many, but the result was one. Virginia remained standing in the middle of the room, gazing into the emptiness where he had just been. Coldness pierced through her. The end. The end. Suddenly, the silence of the night was shattered by a crash. Somewhere very near. Screams. Sounds of struggle. Virginia rushed to the window. The streets were empty. Only scattered street lamps illuminated the wet cobblestones. But from the alley where the Emperor had turned just a minute ago, alarming sounds echoed. Glass shattered, hooves clattered, another scream, full of terror. Virginia turned cold. The Emperor, his carriage was waiting just around the corner. Events outside unfolded instantly, but their echo reached her mansion, shaking the walls. Figures in dark cloaks emerged from the shadows, the glint of steel in the lamplight, the rush of steps. Napoleon managed to jump back. Instinct and military training saved his life. The guards reacted. A struggle ensued. The carriage bolted away. The action on the street ended quickly. The attackers vanished, leaving behind only noise and an anxious silence. But for Virginia, everything was just beginning. The next morning, all of Paris was buzzing. They spoke only of the assassination attempt on the Emperor. Newspapers inflated headlines. Gossip multiplied like wildfire. And at the center of this whirlwind of rumors was Virginia of Castiglione. The wildest versions spread through the city. Some whispered that the attack was aimed at her, and the Emperor just happened to be nearby. Others speculated that she herself had orchestrated the whole thing, hoping to somehow shock Napoleon into staying close to her. There were also those who recalled her diplomatic mission and suspected a political intrigue connected to Italy. But for Virginia, all these rumors merged into one single, deafening, and deadly dangerous wave. She was being blamed, she was undesirable, she had become dangerous. Her brilliant role was over. She had turned into a pawn that needed to be removed from the board. She stood in her boudoir, which only yesterday had seemed like the center of the world, but today felt like a prison. Her servants avoided meeting her gaze. A chill of alienation was palpable everywhere. Despair squeezed her chest. There was no one she could turn to for help. Throughout all those months of brilliant life, she had not made a single true friend. Her sarcastic remarks, her arrogance, her confidence in her own superiority had pushed away even those who tried to get close. Now she was completely alone. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. An official envoy from the palace entered. With a cold, expressionless face, he handed her a sealed envelope. Virginia opened it with trembling fingers. An order, brief and non-negotiable. She was instructed to leave Paris immediately. At this moment, she understood that the assassination attempt was not just a scandal. It was a point. Irreversible. The connection with the Emperor, for which she had sacrificed everything, was over forever. This incident, which happened on her doorstep, had canceled everything. In his eyes, there would be no more desire or admiration, only the memory of that night and the danger. At this moment, she remembered the words of one of Empress Eugénie's ladies-in-waiting, uttered long ago with a mix of envy and disdain. "She always holds her head too high, that Countess of yours. She might have to fall. It's especially painful to fall from such a height. These words now echoed in her ears like a curse. I'm not to blame. She whispered into the emptiness of the room, clutching the paper with the order. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the words. It's someone else's setup. But what difference does it make now? None. Napoleon did not believe her. In his eyes, there was no longer any passion, warmth, or even a hint of former interest, only cold aversion, or perhaps fear of the scandal she had involved him in and its political consequences. Her mission was over. Her time in Paris was up. This city, which she had so brilliantly conquered, was now expelling her. She had no choice but to obey. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That same evening, her carriage left the city. Paris, which had once greeted her with bright lights and applause, now saw her off only with the echo of wheels on the cobblestones. Silhouettes of people flickered outside the windows, and each one seemed to watch her leave with disapproval. They forgot who I am, but I will return. I will be back. Virginia pressed her face against the cold glass, not noticing the tears running down her cheeks. After her exile from Paris, she tried to find her place. She returned to Florence, but her hometown seemed gray and narrow compared to the Parisian vistas. People looked at her with reserve, as if afraid of her former influence or perhaps enjoying her downfall. In Italy, she felt like a prisoner. She went to London, hoping for a fresh start. The British capital beckoned with its contrasts. Here, luxury and poverty, art and despair existed side by side. But Virginia found no resonance in foggy London. She was invited to visits, but only to see the one who had once captivated Napoleon III. To the English, she was an exotic curiosity, but not one of their own. Eventually, as if having come full circle, Virginia found herself in Paris again. But this time, neither carriages nor court footmen awaited her. She settled in an apartment modest by her former standards. Paris no longer greeted her with lights and applause. The city that had once opened the doors of luxurious salons and ballrooms to her now seemed alien and cold. The palaces where she had shone were filled with new favorites, and her name gradually dissolved in the whispers of courtiers, like mist in the morning air. It was then, in an attempt to hold on to fleeting beauty and attention, that Virginia found her new passion photography. She met with Pierre-Louis Pearson, one of the best photographers in Paris, but she was not just a model. She was a director, a co-creator. In Pearson's studio, she created her own world, her own legend. Here she controlled the light, the pose, the costume. Here she could be whoever she wanted, a goddess, an empress, a tragic heroine. Hundreds of photographs were taken over the years, capturing her beauty and her vision of herself. She studied herself, recreated herself on paper, trying to freeze what was relentlessly slipping away. Photography became her refuge, her passion, and her weapon. But time is unforgiving. The world in which Virginia had shone was disappearing. The emperor was overthrown, the Second Empire fell, Napoleon III died in exile. And along with that world, her beauty faded. For a woman whose pedestal was built on appearance, whose power lay in the eyes of admiring men, aging is the hardest fate. Virginia could not look in the mirror. Every reflection mocked her, reminding her of who she was and who she had become. Relentless wrinkles, a faded gaze, it was unbearable. She got rid of all the mirrors in her home. She ordered black curtains that completely blocked out the daylight. The walls of her apartment in Place Vendôme darkened, becoming as dark as night. Her world shrank to a few rooms, away from prying eyes. She became a voluntary prisoner of the past. A complete recluse, she only went out at night when the city slept, wrapped in a veil, hiding even from the moonlight. The whispers of rare passers-by caused her physical pain, a painful reminder of the time when that whisper was a hymn of praise. They remembered the legend, but they did not recognize the shadow hiding under the black cloak. Virginia of Castiglione, once the pearl of Italy, now lived in a house tomb filled with shadows. Inside, semi-darkness, dust and silence, and photographs. Dozens, hundreds of photographs, her own images frozen in time, a young, smiling beauty in a lavish dress. Here, in a Roman goddess costume, and here, as a tragic heroine. And those late photographs, where she tried to recreate her former self, but the camera captured only pain, decay, and desperate denial of reality. She sat in the darkness, surrounded by her past selves. She ate almost nothing, living only on memories and ghosts of bygone days. Servants who remained with her out of loyalty or pity passed her food through the door. They said the Countess did not like to be disturbed. But the truth was, she was afraid someone would see her present self. Old, lonely, faded, having lost everything, including the dearest thing. Virginia Oldoïni, Countess of Castiglione, died in 1899 in her gloomy apartment on Place Vendôme at the age of 62. She is buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, in the city that brought her triumph and exile. The story of her life is not only a chapter in the history of Italian unification or the French court. It is a sad, vivid story of a woman whose beauty became her greatest triumph and ultimately her tragedy. A story of vanity, love, loss, and loneliness. A story of how a brilliant star, unable to accept the sunset, turned into a shadow hiding from the world that once lay at her feet, but which she could never truly love. If you enjoy experiencing history through storytelling, make sure to subscribe. Many more fascinating tales await. This story is inspired by real events but includes elements of artistic fiction. Up next, you will see a list of historical facts that formed its foundation.